The morning was unusually quiet when I first noticed the illegal spike strips on my private road. As I approached the barricade, my stomach churned. The crude installation looked like a scene out of a dystopian movie. Jagged spikes stretched across the pavement, gleaming in the sunlight, with a glaring sign that read, "Private access restricted by order of the homeowner association." I stood there in disbelief. This was my road leading to my property, a home I had worked tirelessly to maintain. Yet here it was, commandeered by an entity that had no legal right to interfere. I took a deep breath and called the homeowner association office. The phone was answered by Karen, the self-proclaimed enforcer of the rules, and a woman infamous for her manipulative tactics and sharp tongue. "Oh, John," she drawled, her voice oozing condescension. "Those spikes were necessary. You've been using the road without paying the new maintenance fees. We're just enforcing the rules." "This is my road," I snapped. "I've owned it for years. Your so-called fees are illegal, and you have no right to block access to my property." Karen chuckled. "That's not what the new bylaw says. You're welcome to contest it, but good luck. The vote was unanimous." I hung up, fuming. This was more than a power trip. It was a direct attack on my rights. I decided to consult a lawyer, but before I could, things escalated. That evening, I returned home to find a note taped to my door. "Failure to comply with homeowner association regulations will result in further action, including potential fines and legal proceedings." The words sent a chill down my spine. I knew Karen and her cronies wouldn't stop there. Determined to resolve the issue legally, I gathered all my property documents and headed to a lawyer the next day. As I explained the situation, the lawyer, Ms. Clark, frowned deeply. "John, this is a blatant overreach. From what you've told me, they're not just acting outside their authority, they're committing several violations of property law. But fighting them will take time and resources." Time wasn't on my side. That evening, Karen escalated her campaign. Hidden cameras appeared on the trees lining my property, their blinking red lights a stark reminder of the surveillance I now faced. A confrontation was inevitable. I stormed into the next homeowner association meeting, clutching my documents. The room fell silent as I entered. Karen sat at the head of the table, her smirk as infuriating as ever. "John," she said with mock sweetness, "what a surprise. Care to join the discussion on our new landscaping project?" "Cut the pretense, Karen," I growled, slamming my papers onto the table. "You've overstepped your authority. These spike strips are illegal, and so are your so-called bylaws. I have proof right here." Karen's smile faltered for a brief moment, but she recovered quickly. "Well, that's your opinion," she said smoothly. "But the board has already voted, and the decision is final." As the days passed, the situation worsened. My neighbors began avoiding me, whispering behind my back. It wasn't long before I discovered why. Karen had spread rumors, claiming I was refusing to pay my dues and threatening the community's safety by neglecting my responsibilities. Then came the sabotage. One night, I woke to the smell of smoke. My garage was on fire. Panicked, I grabbed the fire extinguisher and managed to put out the flames before they consumed the structure. But the damage was done, and I knew it wasn't an accident. The following morning, I found another note taped to my door. Rage boiled inside me. Karen had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to back down. I began documenting every interaction, every act of harassment, and every illegal move the homeowner association made. With Ms. Clark's help, I filed a formal complaint with the local authorities. The police initially dismissed my claims as a civil matter, but the tide turned when Ms. Clark uncovered evidence of financial misconduct within the homeowner association. It seemed Karen had been funneling community funds into personal accounts, using the guise of maintenance fees to cover her tracks. The discovery emboldened me to rally my neighbors. One by one, I shared my evidence and convinced them to attend a secret meeting at my house. It was there that we formed a coalition to challenge Karen and her corrupt board. As the night wore on, unity replaced fear, and we vowed to take back control of our community. But Karen wasn't done. She retaliated with threats of eviction and legal action, pushing the conflict to a boiling point. The battle for justice had only just begun. The coalition we had formed during that tense, candlelit meeting felt like a small victory. For the first time, I wasn't alone in my fight against the homeowner association. My neighbors, once silent bystanders, were beginning to see Karen and her board for what they truly were, bullies hiding behind a veil of bureaucracy. But our newfound unity came with a price. Karen was not one to back down, and her retaliation was swift and brutal. A week after the meeting, I woke up to find that someone had tampered with my mailbox. Letters were scattered across my lawn, but it wasn't the mess that sent a chill down my spine. Among the papers was an envelope marked with the Homeowner Association's logo, containing a formal notice of non-compliance. According to the letter, I was now facing an additional $5,000 fine for unauthorized gatherings on my property. I clenched the paper in my hand, anger bubbling to the surface. Karen's games were becoming more aggressive, and it was clear she was targeting me to make an example. The coalition needed to act fast, or we'd all face the same fate. Later that day, I organized another meeting, this time in the local park to avoid further fines. My neighbors arrived cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of Karen's spies. We had barely begun to discuss our next steps when one of the attendees, an older gentleman named Frank, stood up with a grim expression. "I found these on my property," he said, holding up a plastic bag filled with small, metallic objects. Nails. Gasps rippled through the group as Frank explained how his car tires had been punctured, forcing him to replace all four. He wasn't the only one. Several others shared similar stories of unexplained damage to their vehicles and property. It was clear. Karen and her allies were resorting to outright sabotage. "This isn't just harassment anymore," I said, my voice firm. "It's criminal." We agreed to document every incident, compiling photos, receipts, and written statements. Ms. Clark assured us that this evidence would strengthen our case, but it would take time to build a solid legal argument. Time, however, was not on our side. One evening, as I sat on my porch reviewing the growing pile of evidence, I noticed a faint red light blinking in the distance. At first, I thought it was a reflection, but as I moved closer, I realized it was a camera. It had been installed high up in one of the trees bordering my property. Its lens pointed directly at my front yard. Furious, I climbed up and dismantled the device, only to discover a second camera hidden near my driveway. By the time I was done, I had found 4 cameras in total, all expertly concealed and wired to transmit data remotely. I knew Karen was behind it, but proving it would be another matter entirely. When I confronted her at the next homeowner association meeting, she didn't even try to deny it. "Surveillance is perfectly within our rights," she said with a smug smile. "We have to ensure compliance after all." The room erupted into chaos as I presented the cameras to the group. Several board members looked uncomfortable, but Karen's loyalists quickly jumped to her defense, claiming the surveillance was for the community's safety. "Safety?" I shot back. "Since when does safety involve spying on private property?" Karen's smirk never wavered. "If you have nothing to hide, John, you shouldn't be worried." That night, I couldn't sleep. The cameras, the fines, the constant harassment, it was all becoming too much. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, but I knew giving up wasn't an option. The next morning, I decided to escalate the fight. With Ms. Clark's guidance, I filed a restraining order against the homeowner association, citing the surveillance as a violation of privacy. I also reached out to the local news station, providing them with a detailed account of the homeowner association's misconduct. Within days, a reporter arrived to interview me, and the story quickly gained traction. Karen's reaction was predictably explosive. The day after the news segment aired, I found a handwritten note taped to my car windshield. "You've made a big mistake. This isn't over." The message was chilling, but it only strengthened my resolve. Karen's tactics were backfiring. The more she tried to intimidate me, the more determined I became to expose her corruption. As tensions reached a boiling point, I received an unexpected phone call from someone inside the homeowner association, a whistleblower who wanted to remain anonymous. They provided me with internal emails and documents proving that Karen had been embezzling funds for years, using fake invoices and forged signatures to cover her tracks. The evidence was a game changer. Armed with this new information, I called an emergency meeting of the coalition. This time, there was no hesitation among my neighbors. We unanimously agreed to file a formal complaint with the state attorney general, demanding an investigation into the homeowner association's activities. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like we had the upper hand. Karen's empire of intimidation was beginning to crumble, and I was ready to see it fall. The anonymous whistleblower's evidence was a turning point in our battle against Karen and the corrupt homeowner association. The documents exposed years of financial fraud, including falsified invoices and embezzlement. My lawyer, Ms. Clark, wasted no time filing an official complaint with the state attorney general's office. But even as we took these steps, Karen's retaliation grew more aggressive. One morning I woke to find my car tires slashed. On the windshield was another note, written in the same scrawled handwriting as before. This wasn't just intimidation, it was a declaration of war. I reported the incident to the police, but their response was frustratingly nonchalant. "Unless you catch them in the act," the officer said, "there's not much we can do." I refused to let this stop me. Karen and her allies had underestimated my resolve, and I was determined to show them they'd picked the wrong fight. The local news story about the homeowner association's misconduct had gained traction, and soon it was picked up by larger outlets. Journalists began reaching out to me for interviews, and I gladly shared the evidence we had gathered. The public backlash against Karen and her board was swift and brutal. Social media exploded with outrage, and residents from neighboring communities began coming forward with their own stories of harassment and corruption. Karen, however, remained defiant. At the next homeowner association meeting, she dismissed the media reports as sensationalized nonsense and accused me of destabilizing the community. Her loyalists nodded in agreement, but I could see cracks beginning to form. Some board members avoided eye contact, their confidence wavering. The tension in the room was palpable as I stood to address the group. "Destabilizing the community?" I said, my voice steady but firm. "Karen, you're the one who's been stealing from us. These documents don't lie." I held up a copy of the whistleblower's evidence. "It's only a matter of time before the authorities hold you accountable." Karen's smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered. "You have no proof that I've done anything illegal," she said, her tone icy. "This is just a desperate attempt to discredit me." "Then why are you so nervous?" I shot back. The room erupted into murmurs, and for the first time, I saw doubt in the eyes of Karen's supporters. That night, I received a frantic call from one of my neighbors, Sarah. "John, you need to come over," she said, her voice trembling. "They've done something to my house." When I arrived, I saw what she meant. Her front yard was littered with trash, and someone had spray-painted the word traitor in bold red letters across her garage door. Sarah was in tears, her young children clinging to her. "This has gone too far," I said, my anger boiling over. "We're not going to let them get away with this." The following day, we installed security cameras around Sarah's property and mine. We also organized patrols within the coalition, taking turns keeping watch at night. It wasn't long before our vigilance paid off. One night around 2 a.m., the motion sensor on my driveway camera triggered an alert on my phone. I checked the live feed and saw two figures in hoodies attempting to tamper with my car. I immediately called the police and ran outside, shouting at them to stop. They fled, but not before the cameras captured clear footage of their faces. When the police arrived, I handed over the footage. "This should be enough to press charges," I said, my heart pounding. The officer nodded, promising to follow up. For the first time, I felt like we had a tangible lead. As the investigation into Karen's activities gained momentum, Ms. Clark informed me that the State Attorney General's office was taking our complaint seriously. They had launched a formal inquiry into the homeowner association's finances, and subpoenas had been issued for Karen and several board members. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. She hired a high-profile attorney and began a smear campaign against me, claiming I was the real troublemaker and accusing me of inciting unrest. Flyers with my face and the word liar appeared on telephone poles around the neighborhood. It was a low blow, but it only strengthened my resolve. "Let her dig her own grave," Ms. Clark said. "The more desperate she gets, the more mistakes she'll make." Despite the chaos, there were small victories that kept us going. The coalition continued to grow as more neighbors joined our cause, fed up with Karen's tyranny. At one meeting, an elderly couple shared how Karen had bullied them into paying for unnecessary repairs to their home. Their story brought tears to the eyes of everyone in the room and reaffirmed why we were fighting. As the weeks went on, the tension reached a fever pitch. The date for the Attorney General's hearing was set, and the entire neighborhood was buzzing with anticipation. Karen's once unshakable confidence was beginning to show cracks, and I knew we were on the verge of a breakthrough. But Karen wasn't finished yet. Her next move would be her most desperate and dangerous one yet, and it would push the conflict to its breaking point. The closer we got to the Attorney General's hearing, the more chaotic the situation became. Karen's smear campaign was relentless, but the tide of public opinion was turning against her. Neighbors who once sided with her began to question her actions as more evidence of her corruption came to light. Still, Karen was determined to maintain her stranglehold over the community, and her next move was her boldest yet. One afternoon, as I returned home from a meeting with Ms. Clark, I found my driveway blocked by a construction crew. A massive truck was unloading concrete barriers, and workers were digging trenches along the edge of my property. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, storming up to the foreman. He glanced at his clipboard and shrugged. "We're installing new drainage systems. The homeowner association approved the project." "This is private property," I snapped. "You have no right to be here." Karen appeared from behind one of the trucks. Her ever-present smirk plastered across her face. "Oh, John," she said sweetly, "this is for the benefit of the community. Surely you understand." "The benefit of the community?" I shouted. "You're trespassing. Get off my property now or I'll call the police." Karen's smile twisted into a sneer. "Go ahead," she said, "but I assure you, we have all the necessary permits." I did call the police, and when they arrived, Karen was quick to produce a stack of documents she claimed were permits authorizing the construction. The officer's expression was skeptical as he reviewed them, but Karen's confidence never wavered. "These documents are fraudulent," I said, my voice firm. "She doesn't have the authority to approve anything on my property." The officer sighed, clearly frustrated by the situation. "This is a civil matter," he said eventually. "You'll need to take it up with the courts." As the crew continued their work, I felt a surge of helpless rage. Karen had crossed every line, and she knew it. But I wasn't going to let her win. That night, I gathered my coalition and shared what had happened. Together, we drafted a formal complaint to the city council, demanding an immediate halt to the construction. Ms. Clark also filed an emergency injunction to stop the work until the matter could be resolved in court. Karen's audacity didn't stop at construction projects. She began targeting coalition members with renewed vigor. Sarah's property was vandalized again, this time with threatening graffiti. Frank's car windows were smashed. Even the elderly couple who had shared their story at our meeting received anonymous letters warning them to stay out of homeowner association business. The coalition was on edge, but we refused to back down. We pooled our resources to install more security cameras and hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Karen's activities. What he uncovered was shocking. Not only was Karen embezzling funds, but she was also involved in a scheme with a local construction company to inflate project costs and split the profits. The turning point came 2 weeks before the hearing. Early one morning, a convoy of law enforcement vehicles descended on the homeowner association's office. Armed with warrants, investigators raided the building, seizing computers, financial records, and personal files. The news spread like wildfire, and by midday, Karen's face was splashed across every local news channel. Watching the footage, I felt a surge of vindication. But the fight wasn't over yet. Karen's lawyer immediately released a statement claiming the raid was a political stunt orchestrated by disgruntled homeowners. She continued to deny all allegations, insisting that she was the victim of a witch hunt. The raid only seemed to embolden Karen's loyalists, who doubled down on their support for her. At the next homeowner association meeting, tensions reached a boiling point. The room was packed with residents, reporters, and even a few police officers. Karen took the floor, her voice dripping with indignation. "This community has always been a beacon of unity," she began, her tone self-righteous. "And yet certain individuals have chosen to tear us apart with baseless accusations and lies." I couldn't stay silent. "Baseless?" I interrupted, standing up. "We have the evidence, Karen. The raid proved what we've known all along. You've been stealing from us, bullying us, and abusing your power." The room erupted into chaos as residents began shouting over each other. Some demanded Karen's resignation, while others accused me of trying to destroy the community. It was clear that the neighborhood was deeply divided, and the only thing that would settle the matter was the upcoming hearing. As I left the meeting that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was planning something drastic. Her grip on power was slipping, and I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. The final showdown was just around the corner, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The day of the Attorney General's hearing arrived with an air of tense anticipation. The courthouse was packed with reporters, residents, and legal representatives. Karen's legal team, led by a high-profile defense attorney, was ready to fight tooth and nail to discredit the allegations. But we had the truth on our side, and the mountain of evidence collected by Ms. Clark, the private investigator, and the coalition was undeniable. I sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Ms. Clark and several coalition members. Karen sat across from us, her usual smug demeanor replaced by a cold, calculating glare. As the proceedings began, the judge called for order, and the first witness was brought forward, the whistleblower. The whistleblower, whose identity had been protected until now, was revealed to be none other than Karen's former assistant, Lisa. Her testimony was devastating. With meticulous detail, Lisa described how Karen had manipulated financial records, forged signatures, and strong-armed contractors into participating in her schemes. Karen told me, Lisa said, her voice trembling but resolute, that no one would ever question her authority. She said people were too scared of losing their homes to challenge her. Karen's lawyer tried to discredit Lisa, accusing her of lying out of spite. But Ms. Clark was ready. She presented a series of emails and financial documents that corroborated Lisa's story, leaving the defense with little room to maneuver. One by one, members of the coalition took the stand. Sarah recounted the vandalism and threats she had endured. Frank described the nails scattered across his driveway and the intimidation tactics used against him. The elderly couple shared how Karen had extorted them for bogus repair fees. When it was my turn, I spoke about the illegal spike strips, the surveillance cameras, and the relentless harassment. I described how Karen had turned a once peaceful community into a battleground, using fear and manipulation to maintain control. This isn't about one person, I said, addressing the courtroom. This is about standing up to a system that preys on the vulnerable. Karen thought she was untouchable, but today, we're here to prove her wrong. As the hearing continued, it became clear that Karen was cornered, but she wasn't ready to go down without a fight. During a recess, she called an emergency meeting with her legal team. When the court reconvened, Karen herself took the stand. This entire case is built on lies and personal vendettas, she declared, her voice sharp and defiant. I have always acted in the best interest of this community. These accusations are nothing more than a smear campaign orchestrated by disgruntled residents. Her performance was convincing to some, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Ms. Clark's cross-examination dismantled Karen's claims, exposing her web of deceit for what it was. After days of testimony and deliberation, the judge finally delivered the verdict. Karen was found guilty of multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and harassment. The court ordered her to repay the stolen funds, and she was stripped of her position as head of the homeowner association. Additionally, she faced criminal charges that would likely result in prison time. The courtroom erupted into applause as the judge banged his gavel. Relief washed over me as I realized the nightmare was finally over. Karen's reign of terror had come to an end, and justice had been served. In the weeks that followed, the community began the slow process of healing. The coalition worked together to elect a new, transparent board for the homeowner association. The illegal spike strips were removed, and the damaged properties were repaired with funds recovered from Karen's fraudulent activities. Neighbors who had once been divided came together to restore trust and unity. Sarah organized a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate our victory, and even the elderly couple, who had been too afraid to speak out before, joined in the festivities. For the first time in years, the community felt like home again. As I stood in my driveway, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. We had faced a powerful adversary and emerged victorious. Karen had underestimated us, but she had also taught us an important lesson. When people stand together, even the most corrupt systems can be brought down. Months later, I received a letter from Lisa, the whistleblower. She had started a new job in a neighboring city and wanted to thank me for giving her the courage to come forward. "You showed me that doing the right thing is always worth it," she wrote. "Because of you, I found a fresh start. Thank you." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, a reminder of the fight we had won and the community we had saved. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were heading in the right direction.